On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Muhammadu Buhari, President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, and invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Heads of State and Government, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, let me, on behalf of the government and people of Nigeria, congratulate you on your well-deserved election as President of the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly. I would like to assure you of the full support and cooperation of the Nigerian delegation throughout your tenure. I would like to commend your predecessor, His Excellency Mr. Volkan Bashir, for the many remarkable achievements recorded during his tenure despite the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Permit me to congratulate the Secretary General Antonio Guterres on his re-election and commend his strong commitment to making the United Nations more alive to its responsibilities. I also want to express my gratitude to him for reappointing Ms. Niger Muhammad as the Deputy Secretary General to assist him in discharging his responsibilities. Mr. President, excuse me, the theme of this year's General Assembly, building silence, resilience through hope to recover from COVID-19, rebuild sustainability, respond to needs of the planet, respect the rights of the people, and revitalize the United Nations sums up our common desire to rescue our planet, recover our economies, and restore hope to all the peoples of the world. In this regard, my delegation will continue to support the United Nations as the indispensable forum for international cooperation and the cornerstone of the multilateral system rooted in respect for international law, including international human rights law, and predicated on a rules-based order. On our part, Nigeria has made efforts to contain the virus and hold its deadly onslaught on our people. Our efforts have been rewarded with moderate success. At the outset, we recognize detection and contact tracing to be important tools in combating the virus. In this connection, from a mere 4 laboratories with testing and detection capacities, we ramped up the facilities to over 140 centers today. Similarly, we built isolation centers and emergency hospitals wards in record time all over the country. We carry out genomic sequencing in designated laboratories across the country with a view to detecting variants in circulation. In addition, over 40,000 healthcare workers have recently been trained on infection, prevention, and control measures with the support of various partners. Nigeria remains grateful for the assistance received from our partners and friends all over the world. Vaccination is the key to our safe emergence from the pandemic. We fully support the COVAX initiative, from which we have benefited. We also thank the United States of America, Turkey, India, China, European Union, and others for the vaccines provided. Despite the acknowledgement, however, I would like to reiterate my call for a fairer and more equitable distribution of vaccines in all countries so that together we can fight and contain the pandemic. The rising wave of newer and more contagious strains makes this even more urgent. No country can afford the socio-economic implications of prolonged shutdown. It is imperative to underscore that no one is safe until everyone is safe. Mr. President, Nigeria remains deeply concerned over the illicit trade, transfer, and circulation of small arms and light weapons. Their excessive accumulation and uncontrolled spread in many regions of the world are having devastating humanitarian and socio-economic consequences, especially on the continent of Africa. It is on this note that my delegation calls for the worldwide application of the Arms Trade Treaty to codify accountability in conventional arms trade, which is critical to the security of nations. This is in recognition of the need for a broad-based global partnership in the ongoing battle against transborder crimes, including terrorism and piracy. Mr. President, we must deal not only with the symptoms of conflict, but also the immediate causes that fuel conflicts in the first place. These include poor and undemocratic governance, human rights abuses, poverty, ignorance, injustice, and inequalities. There are no easy solutions to these conditions. They require long-term investments and more effective international cooperation. In this connection, my delegation underscores the importance of promoting peaceful, unfettered, and inclusive participation of states in global actions towards conflict prevention. This will facilitate the achievement of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the African Union Agenda 2063. In West Africa especially, our democratic gains of the past decades are now being eroded. The recent trend of unconstitutional takeover of power, sometimes in reaction to unilateral changes of constitution by some leaders, must not be tolerated by the international community. Nigeria fully supports the efforts of ECOWAS to address this growing challenge and appreciates the support of both the African Union and the United Nations. In this regard, I would like to reiterate that as leaders of our individual member states, we need to adhere to constitutional provisions of our countries, particularly on term limits. This is one area that generates crisis and political tension in our sub-region. Mr. President, Nigeria is fully committed to nuclear non-proliferation and has always supported the view that it should involve all states. Disarmament conventions deserve the support of all states, small, large, nuclear, or non-nuclear. Nuclear weapons remain the ultimate agents of mass destruction, and their total elimination should be the final objective of all disarmament processes within the broad spectrum of goals being pursued by the United Nations. In this regard, Nigeria would participate actively in forthcoming review conference of Nuclear Prohibition Treaty and also the first meeting of states parties to the landmark treaty on the provision of nuclear weapons, scheduled to take place within the first quarter of 2022. Nigeria regards these upcoming events as important steps towards realization of a world free of nuclear weapons. We are therefore supportive of any diplomatic efforts in this direction. We hope that the upcoming Nuclear Prohibition Treaty Review Conference would lead to a successful outcome that would facilitate the nuclearization of the world. We will do our part to ensure such an outcome. Mr. President, terrorism continues to dominate security discourse worldwide. In Nigeria, Boko Haram, terrorist group, though fragmented by internal strife and weakened by our defense forces, is still active and preying on soft targets. Nigeria will continue to work closely with United Nations counter-terrorism bodies and entities with a view to bringing this scourge to an end. Nigeria has spared no effort in addressing the challenges of terrorism posed by the activities of Boko Haram in northeast Nigeria, the Lake Chad region, as well as banditry in the northwest and north central. Mr. President, the impact of climate change is already with us in Nigeria, manifesting in various ways: conflict trigger, food insecurity, drying up of lakes, loss of livelihood, and youth migration, among others. The trend is the same in many other countries that are threatened by forest fires, rising seas, drought, and desertification. As leaders, we must create inclusive and gender-sensitive policies that address all issues connected to climate action for mitigation and resilience. This is why we are working on a transition to low-carbon economy consistent with achieving the Paris Climate Agreement on the Sustainable Development Goals. Mr. President, combating illicit financial flows and ensuring the recovery and return of illicitly acquired assets have the potential to provide resources in the immediate term for financing development in the area of COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. It drives national governments of resources needed to provide adequate and meaningful sources of livelihood for their citizens. The latter gives rise to more irregular migration patterns and unwholesome consequences for interstate and human relations. Mr. President, the issue of debt, we have seen that developing countries have been faced with unsustainable debt burdens even before the pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has increased the risk of a new wave of deepening debt where vital public financial resources are allocated to external debt servicing and payments at the expense of domestic health and financing for critical development needs. Therefore, there is an urgent need to consider expansion and extension of debt service suspension initiative to include all least developed countries and small island developing states facing fiscal and liquidity challenges. Mr. President, Nigeria reaffirms that international trade is an engine for development and sustained economic growth, as well as global eradication of poverty. We therefore call for the reform agenda that will engender better recovery from this crisis, build resilience to future shocks, and pursue transformative development strategies that can deliver the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Mr. President, the global food system has in recent times been impacted by several factors, such as population growth, availability and accessibility of arable land and water resources, climate change, and loss of biodiversity. Climate change and unpredictable shocks, such as the current global pandemic, further exacerbate vulnerabilities in the global food system, requiring the United Nations urgent attention. Mr. President, Nigeria has been steadfast in safeguarding human rights, including the advancement of women, the protection of children, the protection of the rights of people living with disabilities, the treatment of migrants, refugees, returnees, and displaced persons, as well as the promotion of fundamental freedoms through all legitimate means. In this regard, my delegation recommends the positive example of leaders like Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand. The recent rise in hate-related crimes globally underscores the urgent need to continue our engagement about racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and other related intolerance. It is sad to note that the issue of racism remains alive globally. We are beginning to forget our affirmation of the inherent dignity and the equal and inalienable rights of every individual as enshrined in the United Nations Charter. No society can claim to be free or just if it is deprived of any one of these rights. Today, racism drives hate crimes and institutional discrimination. In all this, Africans and people of African descent are among the major victims. I am confident that this forum will make significant impact in the quest to end race-related vices and injustice. Mr. President, no reform of the United Nations system is more urgent than that of Security Council. Stakeholders around the world are asking how such power could be concentrated in scant representation. The governmental negotiations have taken too long, some 15 years. We must avoid going in circles. Consensus has been achieved in some of the elements of this reform, especially that of the representation of Africa on the basis of the El-Zuwaini Consensus and the Sartre Declaration. It is unreasonable to expect unanimity in this matter. Mr. President, our organization is at the peak of the multilateral system. It is also the preeminent body for solving our current and emerging challenges and for developing norms that are protective of us all. In the current moment, hope for this is dependent on how we assist each other to get COVID-19 out of all countries, regardless of their classification. We can do and we must do. In this regard, let me close my statement by paying special tribute to a great and humane internationalist and an exemplary practitioner of multilateral cooperation, I am speaking of Chancellor Angela Merkel of the Federal Republic of Germany. As she exits the stage, we wish her well. Thank you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria for the statement just made, and I request the protocol to escort His Excellency.